So this is part 2 of the BRSR implementation guide. In my earlier presentation as a part 1, I had introduced what is BRSR and what are the 9 principles and how to report that in BRSR format up to section B. Now in this presentation we will see how and what to report in section C in BRSR format. So basically, this is about what has been the performance of the company with respect to integrating the 9 principles of the NVG. Now, so you will see further that there are basically 2 things. One is what are the essential, that is mandatory reporting that you are required to do, and what are the voluntary, that is leadership indicators. So whenever you see in the BRSR format essential indicators, that means you will have to mandatorily fill it. And wherever you see leadership indicators, that means you may or may not, that is purely voluntary, right? Now we see the format where the principle wise performance disclosures are required to be done. So what is principle number 1? Principle number 1 is businesses should conduct and govern themselves with the integrity and in a manner that is ethical, transparent and accountable. Now in this part we will be talking about what has the company done with respect to propagating the awareness about the principles to their workforce, whether it is board of directors, key management personnel or their workers, right? What are the total number of training and awareness program held, topics and principles covered under each of the training and its impact, and what is the percentage of the person in respect to category covered by the awareness program. Next is about whether the company has been imposed with any fine or was there any complaints or regulatory enforcement with respect to which can impact any of those principles. So let us look at little bit detail. Details of the fines, penalties, punishment, award, compounding fees, settlement around amount paid in proceedings by the entity or by the directors oblique key management personnel with regulators and law enforcement agencies, judicial institution in the financial year in the following format is to be given. Means what is the principle which was impacted, who has enforced this, and what is the amount of penalty or fine, whatever, what is the case detailed briefly, and whether appeal has been planned. Similarly, you will give about penalty, settlement, compounding fee, whether somebody has been imprisonment or punishment. Okay, so this is about NGRBC principles, nine of them, and whether is there any violation, and whether it's a monetary fine or any kind of imprisonment, etc. has been given. Next, you will see in this part of the format disciplinary action on company personnel, meaning number of instances disclosed in question 2, any appeal revision has been done, whether the entity have an anti-corruption or anti-bribery policy, if yes, provide details in the brief, and what are the number of directors and management personnel, employees, workers against whom disciplinary action was taken by law enforcement agency for the charges of bribery and corruption. This is about bribery and corruption. Details have to be given here. And the serial number 6 is about conflict of interest. Number of complaints received with respect to conflict of interest of the directors or the key management personnel. What are the total numbers of complaints received? What are the remarks? And similarly. Now, serial number 7 is about provide details of any corrective action taken or underway on issues related to fine and penalties and action taken by regulators or law enforcement agencies, judicial institutions on the cases of corruption and conflict of interest. So here this format reporting talks about any punitive action which is taken with respect to corruption or a conflict of interest against the company personnel. Now this is leadership indicator which is voluntary in nature. So what is it saying? The principles awareness program by the value chain partners. Whether like in the earlier case it was asked whether this awareness program conducted to your people. Here in the leadership indicator, it is asking whether such program was conducted for your supply chain partners. So total number of awareness program held, topics and percentage of partners covered. Does entity have process to avoid, manage conflict of interest, including members of the board? This is principle number 2, essential indicator, which is mandatory in nature. So what is principle number 2? Is providing goods and services in a manner that is sustainable and safe. And in this part of the screen, you are required to give details about your R&D investment that you have done to improve the environment, social aspects, whether you have done sustainable sourcing and whether you are your company is applicable to report or comply with the extended producer's responsibility. What is EPR is nothing but how you are disposing the waste as a producer or as a brand owner. So those details are to be given here. This is about R&D and CapEx, whether you have sustainable sourcing, whether you have safely reclaims your product for reuse and recycle, and whether you are applicable to report to waste management under EPR. The next is about leadership indicators. So here, whether you have done the life cycle assessment of product or services. So what is life cycle assessment is simple, that whatever products or services you are giving from raw material to end of life, what is the how it has impacted, or it could impact the environment, social or the governance, and what are the measures you have taken to reduce the impact on, especially on the environment. The next is about social and environmental concerns. So this is again voluntary in nature because it is a leadership indicator, meaning if there is any significant social environment concerns or risk which came out from your life cycle assessment, and what is the action taken to reduce or mitigate the same. So which name of product or service, what is the description, what is the of the risk or the concern, and what is the action taken, need to be given here in this format. Now next is about percentage of the recycled or reused input material to the total material. So here by reporting these, your stakeholders will understand how much of the 3R, that is reuse and recycle part of action is being actually done by your company. Next is about end of life treatment. So of the products and packaging material reclaimed at the end of life products, amount it is reused, recycled or safely disposed as per the following format. So if plastic was recovered, how much of that is being reused or recycled or disposed for the current financial year and previous financial year. Similarly for e-waste, hazardous waste and any other waste. Any waste, whether you had, first of all, how much you have taken back, reclaimed, out of which how much has been reused and recycled and safely disposed. And this is about reclaimed products and their packaging materials as a percentage of the products for each of the product category. So indicate product category, out of the product category how much you have reclaimed and what is the percentage. Principle number 3 talks about businesses should respect and promote the well-being of all the employees, including those in their value chain. So in this part of the format you will see questions asked about how you are managing the well-being of your people. For example, let us say, so whether you are taken, first of all they are asking how many people are there, male, female, that is permanent and non-permanent, and whether you have done health insurance for them, accident insurance, maternity benefits, paternity benefits and daycare facilities, and what is the percentage of employees covered with respect to these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 well-being measures. Similarly, same for your workers, same health insurance, accident insurance, maternity, paternity and daycare facilities. Now this is about retirement benefits. So they're asking you to give details of retirement benefits for current financial year and previous financial year, like number of employees covered as a percentage of total employees, on the retirement benefits and employees, worker, and what is this? These are the benefits, no, like gratuity, ESI, PF, and others. What is deducted and how much is for the percentage of people and how much is deposited with the respective agencies. So in this part, we will see whether your company has provided for the well-being of your people. Number one, whether you are given accessibility of your workplaces to, especially to the differently abled employees, whether you are an equal opportunity player, whether people have been retained, and what is the retention rate, say after paternity leave, maternity leave, and what is the grievance redressal mechanism. So questions like this: are premises, offices of the entity accessible to differently abled employees, workers, as per the requirements of Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act? Does the company have an equal opportunity policy as per the Rights of the Person with the Disabilities Act 2016? And return to work and retention rates for permanent employees and workers that took parental leave. And so the details are to be given in this box. And is there any mechanism available to receive and redress grievances for the following categories of the employees and workers? If yes, give details of the mechanism in brief. For the permanent worker, other than permanent worker, permanent employees, other than permanent employees. And in the principle 3, here they are talking about whether you had facilitated your employees and your people and workers to be part of any of the union or association. So this is about creating a positive environment with respect to your people, expressing their free will to be part of any of the association, or meaning the company, whether it is facilitating forming associations and union so that they can bargain, collective bargain. And whether as a part of the well-being of the employees, whether you have done safety training, upskilling, performance and career development review is what are the questions asked here. For example, details of the training given to the employees and workers on health and safety measures, on skill upgradation for this year and previous financial year for your employees and workers. Similarly, whether you have conducted performance and career development reviews of your employees and workers for the current financial year and the previous financial year. And what are the health and safety management system that the company has, and whether there is a process to identify work related hazards and risk, and whether you have a process for workers to report any work related hazards to remove themselves from such a risk, whether the employees or workers have access to non-occupational medical and healthcare services. This is about safety incident, whether safety incidents were categorized and reported, and is there any last time injury or recordable work related injury, any fatality, high consequence work related injury or ill health. All these details with respect to employees and workers are to be given for this financial year and the previous financial year. Describe the measures taken by the company to ensure safe and healthy workplace. What are the measures you have taken? You may have to give here. And number of company complaints on the following made by employees and workers. So on working conditions and health and safety, and whether similar has been done, whether what is the percentage of the plants and offices that were assessed by either by you as a company or by government or any other third party on health and safety practices and working conditions, whether based on those assessment, whether any corrective action plan is taken or it is underway. Such things are to be given in this part of the format. And this is about leadership indicators with respect to well-being. How you are taken care of your value chain partners, whether life insurance or any compensatory packages in the event of death is given to your employees and workers, Provide measures undertaken by the entity to ensure that statutory dues have been detected and deposited, and whether your employees and workers have suffered high consequence work-related injuries, ill health, fatalities, and what are the details has to be given here. Does the entity provide transition assistance package to facilitate continued employability and management in case of career ending or it is because of termination? Whether you are supporting job assistance program for your people, and whether assessment of your value chain partner has been conducted on health and safety practices and working conditions. And here in serial number 6, they talk about any corrective action taken or underway to address significant risk and concerns arising from the assessment of health and safety practices and working conditions of your value chain partners. Now we move on to principle number 4. Principle number 4 is about respecting the interest and be responsive to your stakeholders. So first of all, describe the process. This is compulsory in nature because it's an essential indicator. Describe the process for identifying the key stakeholder group of the entity. List stakeholder group identified as key for your entity and frequency of engagement of each. Whether you identified some people as your stakeholder group, whether they are vulnerable or marginalized, and how you are communicating with them. Is it through email, SMS, paper, pamphlet, meetings, notice board, website, etc.? What is the frequency of engagement with them? And what is the purpose and scope of engagement, including key topics and concerns raised during those engagements? Now next is about leadership indicators, which is voluntary in nature. So here they talk about provide the process for consultation between the stakeholders and the board on the economic, environmental and social topics, and if consultation is delegated, how the feedback from those consultations have been given back to the board, and whether this consultation is used to support the identification management of environmental social topics, and if so, provide details of the instances and how inputs received from them has been implemented through your policies and activities of the company, and provide details of the instances of engagement with action taken to address the concerns of the vulnerable and marginalized stakeholder groups. This is essential indicators with respect to principle number 5. Businesses should respect and promote human rights. And this part of the format is about awareness training. Employees and workers who have been provided training on human rights issues and policies of the entity in the following format. So how many have been trained or awareness program conducted with respect to human rights for the permanent and non-permanent in the employee category and in the worker category. Next is about what is the minimum wages that you had provided or paid to the employees and workers in the following format. So what is the median? Equal to median wage. To how many of them? This is equal to minimum wages or this is more than the minimum wages. So what is the percentage? Similarly for the previous financial year. This is about salary. What is the median remuneration for each other category? Like what is the median for board of directors, key management personnel, employees other than the board of members of the board and management personnel and workers? And do you have a individual or a committee responsible for addressing human rights impacts or issues caused or contributed by the business? Describe the internal mechanisms in place to redress the grievance related to human rights issues. So what is the internal mechanism available? Next is about what are the complaints that you received with respect to sexual harassment, discrimination at workplace, child labor, forced labor, wages other than the human rights related issues. So how many have been received during this year, filed, pending resolution remarks, similarly for the previous year. What is the mechanism available to prevent adverse consequences to the complainant? If somebody is complaining, he or she should not be made as a victim where you are discriminating and being punished. All that should not happen. And what is the mechanism available to address that part? And next is about human right requirement form part of your business agreement and contracts. So whether it is sourcing or it is any other outsourcing, whether your value chain partners are also aware and implementing the human rights requirements. This is whether you had conducted assessment with respect to this child labor, forced labor, sexual harassment, discrimination, wages, others in your plant and offices, whether it is done by you or by government or by third party. The next is about providing details of any corrective action taken or underway to address significant risk and concern arising from the assessment. So you had assessed in various places if there was some significant risk or concern, how have you addressed or how are you addressing it? Now in the same thing we have leadership indicators, which is voluntary in nature. Details of business process being modified, introduced as a result of addressing human rights grievances. Details of scope and coverage of any human rights due diligence, and is there a premise office of the entity accessible to differently abled visitors as per the requirements of the Rights of the Persons and Disabilities Act of 2016. Now whether if you carried out assessment of your value chain partners on these aspects, please provide what is the details and with the percentage of your value partners covered. Now next is about providing details of corrective action taken to any of the significant risk and concern which came out from the assessment that you have done on their value chain partners. Principle number 6 is about business should respect and make efforts to protect and restore the environment. Now this is we'll go one by one. First, this part talks about what is the energy consumption. In total, electricity, fuel, other sources, energy intensity per rupee of turnover, energy intensity relevant metric selected for your company for the current year and previous financial year. Does the entity have sites, facilities identified as a designated consumers under the performance achieve and trade scheme of the Government of India? So if you are part of that scheme, you will have to provide details here. Provide details of the following disclosures related to water and in the following format. So this is about water usage. This part is about water withdrawal. How much of water that you have withdrawn for your business from the surface, ground, under the ground, third party, sea water, others. And what is the total and what is the intensity per rupee of the turnover, and this is optional. So basically quantity and intensity. Next is about air emission. So in this part, the question is about, has the entity implemented a mechanism for zero liquid discharge? If yes, provide details. Meaning, what is zero liquid discharge is whatever liquid has been used and whatever has been treated, they must be treated and disposed or treated and reused. So that is, so basically ZLD is mostly about reuse of your primary water that you used as a treated water. So for example, treated water can be used in gardens and for watering the gardens, lawns, etc. within the factory or a company premises. Example. So next is about air emission. Under air emission, other than the greenhouse gas emission, provide details of all these things: nitrogen, sulfur, all these matters, hazardous air pollutants, etc., volatile organic compounds, persistent organic pollutants, all that you have to provide here. Here, this part you will provide details about the gas emissions. Provide details of greenhouse gas emissions of scope 1, 2 emissions and its intensity in the following format. We will see what is the scope 1, scope 2. Right now, just remember the scope 1 is what goes out from your factory. Any emission goes out from your factory directly. So scope 1 is direct and scope 2 is indirect, and there is also scope 3, which is again indirect. We'll talk about it in little later in the next slide. So you have to provide here about the total scope 1 and 2 emissions. Does the entity have project related to reducing greenhouse gas emission? If yes, provide details. So now we are just going out of the format just to understand what is the scope 1, 2 emission. Scope 1 is direct emission. As I told you, it can come out from your fuel used by your fleet vehicles, or from your boilers and furnaces and incinerators, or during the manufacturing or processing of materials and chemicals like cement manufacturing, aluminum smelting, petrochemical processing, fugitive emissions including methane emission from coal mines, and the production of electricity from burning coal. And depending upon the type of industry you are in, your scope 1 emission might only include fleet vehicles. So most companies use fleet. So basically understand that scope 1 means directly coming from your operations. Next is indirect, scope 2. Scope 2, please understand that scope 2 is indirect. Simple example is whenever you are purchasing electricity, and for the production and transportation, transmission of electricity, there will be emissions, and those emissions are called indirect emissions. Now we'll also see what is scope 3. This is also indirect emission, but they are coming out from your supply chain partners. For example, your employee is a business travel in a transport not owned by the company. So that is scope 3. Employees commuting to and from work, scope 3. Extraction and production of purchased material, scope 3. Transportation of purchased fuel, scope 3. Transportation and use of sold products, finished products, scope 3. Transport and disposal of waste also, though it is done by others other than the company vehicle or company mechanism, this is called scope 3 emission. Now here this picture is about big picture of scope 1 to 3 emission. So scope 1 is direct from your factories, company factories and company vehicles, scope 1. Scope 2, there are indirect, which is either by electricity that you are purchasing, or while purchased goods and services. Scope 2 is only about energy, purchased electricity, steam, heating or cooling for your own use, that is scope 2. Scope 3 is on the upstream. It can be from your leased assets, employee commuting, business travel, waste generated, transportation, fuel and energy related activities, capital goods and purchased goods and services. This is scope 2 indirect. Scope 3 indirect. Scope 3 direct is like this. It starts from your investments, finance, franchises, leased assets, use of sold item, process of sold products, transportation of and distribution. So upstream, downstream. So this is just to give an idea. Coming back to the format, section C, we are continuing on principle number 6. Here this is about waste management. How much of plastic waste, e-waste, biomedical waste, construction demolition waste, battery waste, radioactive waste is generated, and that for this year and previous financial year. Hazardous waste, any other non-hazardous waste, etc. What are the category of waste, out of which whether it is recycled, reused or any recovery operation, then incineration, landfilling and other disposable operations. So how much is there and how you are disposing is what need to be given in this part of the format. What is your waste management practice and whether your operations are in and around ecologically sensitive areas such as national park, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere, etc., etc. If it is there, then you will have to provide the details here, and whether you have taken necessary approvals from the regulatory authorities. And this is about environmental impact. Environment impact assessment of projects undertaken by entity based on the applicable law in the current financial year. Name of the project, number, date, whether independent external agency has conducted any assessment, and result communicated in the public domain and relevant web link. Is the entity compliant with the applicable environment law regulation guidelines such as Water Prevention Control Act, Air Prevention and Control Pollution Act, Environment Protection Act, etc., etc. If it is there, then you have to provide details here. This is about what is this environmental impact assessment. Basically, what is the impact of the environmental aspects of your project or operations. So what are the 3-4 things? One is, if you do the environment impact assessment, it will help you to render detail on the environmental impact, number basic. Then what are the legitimate options and mitigation to reduce the impact, and how to predict and evaluate the ecological and economic and social effects of growth related activities, and how to promote environment friendly and long-term growth. Yeah. So this is about leadership indicators under energy consumption. So provide breakup of total energy consumed from renewable and non-renewable sources. So that is what is coming under the voluntary part of the principle number 6. Total electricity from renewable resources or sources and from non-renewable sources is what you have to provide. Electricity, fuel, energy, etc. So here we will go on to report about total electricity consumption, fuel consumption, and energy consumption through other sources from non-renewable sources. Water discharge, how much is being discharged to surface, ground, sea water, and whether it is with no treatment or with treatment, third party and others. So this is the details that how you are actually discharging the water. And is there any water consumption in the water stressed areas? So water withdrawal, consumption and discharge in the areas of water stress has to be given the details of which area, what is the operation, and how much water is withdrawn, consumed and discharged in the below format. This is about water stress area, right? Next is about water treatment. Water discharge by destination and level of treatment in kiloliter. Into surface water, whether you are doing treatment, no treatment, groundwater, sea water, and sent to third parties. Others. Scope 3 emission. What is scope 3 emission? We said it is from your value chain partners. So how much of these emissions are there, and what is the per rupee turnover, and what is its intensity. With respect to the ecologically sensitive areas reported, provide details of significant direct and indirect impact on the entity on biodiversity in such areas, along with prevention and remediation measures. So this part is about improving resource efficiency. So if the entity has undertaken any specific initiative or used innovative technology or solution to improve the resource efficiency or reduce the impact due to emission, effluent discharge, waste generated, please provide details of the same as well as outcome of such initiatives as per following manner. So here you have to provide if you have done anything to improve the resource efficiency. Does the entity have business continuity or a disaster management plan? Please give details. Disclose any significant adverse effect to the environment arising from the value chain of the entity. What mitigation adaptation measures have been taken by the entity in this regard? And what is the percentage of value chain partners that were assessed for environmental impact? Principle number 7 is businesses, when engaging in influencing public and regulatory policy, should do so in a manner that is responsible and transparent. So this is mandatory part, essential indicator. Number of, basically your company, whether you have affiliation with any of the trade or industry chambers or trade body, and what are the name and reach of the trade, each of those bodies, how much, whether it is state, national, local, all that needed to be given, state and national. Provide details of corrective action taken or underway, any issues related to anti-competitive conduct by the entity based on the adverse orders from regulatory body authorities. So whether you are following the competition law, whether you violated any of that, and if so, then which authority has issued orders, what is the case, and what is the corrective action taken by you. Public policy advocacy. Though this is about leadership, This is voluntary nature. What is the public policy advocated? What is the method? Whether the information is available in the public domain. What is the review frequency? And this is about inclusive growth and equitable development, principle number 8. So what is this? Whether you have conducted social impact assessment of the project undertaken by the entity based on applicable law. So if you are doing a project for the betterment of the community, what is the social impact is to be provided here. Provide information on the project for which ongoing rehabilitation and resettlement is being undertaken by your entity. Suppose your project is having this rehabilitation resettlement part, and so provide details where it is happening, name, details of the project, which state, which district, and what is the mechanism to receive and redress grievances of that community. Give percentage of the input material sourced from suppliers, directly sourced from MSMEs and small producers, sourced directly from within the district and neighboring districts. Social impact. This is leadership indicators. Provide details of action taken to mitigate negative social impact identified in the social impact assessment, and provide the following information on CSR project undertaken by your entity in the designated aspirational districts as identified by the government bodies. So whether you are joined with the government in uplifting the backward areas of the state or districts. You know that some of the state governments identified as some of the backward districts as the aspirational district to lift them to positive and better level. Whether you are working or you are assisting such initiatives is the question here. This is about the benefits received, derived and shared from intellectual properties owned or acquired by your entity. Basically what they are asking here is to provide details whether you have fairly used the traditional knowledge and you not went on to be, take it as your intellectual property, right? Okay, so that is the question here. Next is about beneficiaries of CSR project. What is the project name, number of people, and what is the percentage of beneficiaries from the vulnerable and marginalized people. Basically they are checking whether you are assisting in the upliftment of vulnerable and marginalized groups. And this is essentially indicator of the last principle, the principle number 9, which is to business to provide value to the customer. This is all about customer value. Okay. Describe the mechanism in place to receive respond to consumer complaints. Turnover of the products, services as a percentage of turnover from all the products. Environmental social parameters relevant to the product. Safe and responsible usage, recycling and safe disposal. Number of consumer complaints with respect to the following. Data privacy. So if you have received consumer complaints in these categories, you have to provide here during this year and during the previous year. Complaint with respect to data privacy, advertising, cyber security, delivery of essential services, restricted trade practices, unfair trade practices, others. And next is about product recall on the account of safety. Whether the product has been voluntarily recalled or forced recall with on safety issues. So basically they are, with this data what they'll understand is how safe were your products, and if at all there was any complaint, whether you handled them properly. Now the next is about having a framework or a policy on cyber security and risk associated to data privacy. Okay. Now next is provide details of the corrective action taken or underway on the issues relating to advertising, delivery of essential services, cyber security, data privacy, reoccurrence of instances of product recall, penalty action taken by regulatory authorities on safety of the product or your services. This is the voluntary part. about consumers. So what is it? Number one, channels and platform where information on product and services can be accessed. Steps taken to inform the educate consumers about safe and responsible use of the product and services. Third is about mechanism in place to inform consumers of any risk of disruption or discontinuation of essential services. Next is about whether the entity display product information on the product over and above what is mandated by law. If yes, provide details in brief. Did your entity carry out survey with respect to consumer satisfaction relating to major product and services and significant locations of operation of the entity? And is there any data, was there any data breach? If it was there, then what are the details has to be provided here. And we come to the end of this part on how to fill up BRSR format. And any questions or doubts or suggestions, you're most welcome to give. I'll be happy to improve. I keep saying this, I'm not perfect, but I'm sure I will improve, and you know that the feedback is the breakfast for the champions. So please help me to help you. Thank you.